The blood-red sun burned across the New Mexico horizon, casting long shadows as Tabitha Goodwin slipped into the back pew of Oro Grande's whitewashed church, her auburn hair hidden beneath a simple bonnet, her presence barely acknowledged by the Sunday congregation. The year was 1878, and she had spent the past 3 months in this dusty mining town, trying her best to remain invisible, a difficult task for a woman alone in the unforgiving West. The service had already begun, Reverend Miller's voice echoing through the modest wooden structure as he preached about forgiveness and redemption. Tabitha kept her eyes down, focusing on the worn Bible in her hands, the pages marked with notes in her delicate handwriting. She didn't notice the tall figure until his shadow fell across her lap, followed by the creak of the wooden bench as he lowered himself into the empty space beside her. Tabitha stiffened, glancing sideways through her lashes. The man wore a black Stetson, now held respectfully in calloused hands. His profile was strong, weathered by sun and wind, with a straight nose and firm jaw darkened by stubble. A cowboy, judging by the worn leather chaps over his denim trousers and the scuffed boots with their silver spurs. What struck her most were his eyes, sharp and alert as they focused on the preacher, but with a gentleness she hadn't expected. She shifted slightly, trying to create more distance between them in the cramped pew. The movement caught his attention, and he turned, offering a brief nod and a smile that barely lifted the corner of his mouth before returning his attention to the sermon. Tabitha exhaled slowly. In 3 months, this was the closest anyone had come to acknowledging her existence in church. She preferred it that way. Invisibility meant safety. Invisibility meant survival. When the final hymn ended and the congregation rose to leave, Tabitha remained seated, waiting for the crowd to thin before making her exit. To her surprise, the cowboy stayed too, his tall frame still beside her as others filed out, exchanging greetings and planning Sunday dinners. "Madam," he said finally, his voice low and rougher than she'd imagined. "Don't believe we've met. Name's Quincy Norwood." Tabitha hesitated, weighing the risk of conversation against the rudeness of ignoring him. "Miss Goodwin," she replied, offering nothing more. "Miss Goodwin." He nodded, accepting her reticence. "You've been in town a while now." It wasn't a question, but she answered anyway. 3 months. "Teaching at the schoolhouse, I hear." She tensed. "You've been asking about me, Mr. Norwood." A slight smile crossed his face as he stood, placing his hat back on his head. "Small town, Miss Goodwin, people talk, and when they don't, it just makes folks more curious." He tipped his hat. "Good day to you." Tabitha watched him walk away, his spurs jingling softly with each step. When he reached the doorway, sunlight illuminated his tall figure for a moment before he disappeared into the brightness beyond. The following morning, Tabitha arrived at the small schoolhouse on the edge of town just after sunrise. The one-room building served the educational needs of Oro Grande's 23 school-age children, ranging from 6-year-old Tommy Wilson to 17-year-old Martha Caldwell, who attended only because her father insisted she finish her education before marrying her sweetheart. Tabitha unlocked the door, breathing in the familiar smell of chalk dust and old books. She moved to her desk, arranging papers for the day's lessons and writing arithmetic problems on the blackboard. Teaching had been her salvation when she arrived in Oro Grande with little more than the clothes on her back and a desperate need for anonymity. The town's previous school teacher had departed suddenly to marry a cattle baron from Texas, leaving the position vacant just when Tabitha needed it most. She was placing the primer readers on the younger children's desks when a knock sounded at the open door. She turned, chalk still in hand, to find Quincy Norwood leaning against the doorframe, his hat in his hands. "Mr. Norwood," she said, surprised. School doesn't begin for another hour." "I'm aware, madam." He stepped inside, his spurs making a melodic sound against the wooden floor. "I've brought something for your students." For the first time, she noticed he carried a burlap sack. He set it on her desk and opened it, revealing several wooden objects. Curious despite herself, Tabitha moved closer. "Puzzles," he explained, laying them out. "Geometric shapes, animal figures. Thought the young ones might enjoy them during break time, made them myself." Tabitha picked up a wooden horse, perfectly carved with flowing mane and tail. "You're a carpenter, Mr. Norwood." "Rancher, madam, but winter nights are long and a man needs something to occupy his hands." His blue eyes watched her carefully. "Do they meet with your approval?" "They're beautiful work," she admitted, examining the interlocking wooden pieces of a star-shaped puzzle. "The children will love them." He nodded, seeming pleased. "Well, I'll leave you to your preparations then." "Mr. Norwood," she called as he reached the door. When he turned, she found herself momentarily at a loss. "Thank you," she finally said. He tipped his hat and was gone, leaving Tabitha staring at the collection of wooden toys, wondering what had prompted such a gesture from a man she barely knew. When the children arrived, their excitement over the puzzles confirmed her assessment. During the noon break, they gathered on the floor, working together to solve the wooden challenges. Tabitha watched them, a rare smile forming on her lips. "Miss Goodwin." Martha Caldwell approached her desk, her voice low to avoid being overheard by the younger students. "Was that Mr. Norwood's handiwork?" "My pa says he's the finest woodworker in the county, though he doesn't often share his creations." "Yes, it was Mr. Norwood," Tabitha confirmed, her curiosity piqued. "Do you know him well?" Martha shrugged. "Everyone knows of him. His ranch is north of town, the Broken Spur. He came here about 5 years back, built it up from nothing." She hesitated. "Pa says he was a lawman before that, somewhere back east, but Mr. Norwood never speaks of it." "I see." Tabitha filed away this information, unsure why she found it interesting. "He doesn't come to town much," Martha continued. "Keeps to himself mostly. That's why folks were surprised to see him in church yesterday." She gave Tabitha a meaningful look. "Sitting beside you." Tabitha felt heat rise in her cheeks. "It was merely an empty seat, Martha. Now, please help the Wilson twins with their spelling. They're still struggling with double consonants." The days that followed brought no sign of Quincy Norwood, and Tabitha told herself she was relieved. The less attention drawn to her, the better. Yet she found herself scanning the faces in town when she visited the general store or post office. And each Sunday, she couldn't help glancing toward the church entrance as the congregation assembled. 2 weeks later, as she was dismissing her students for the day, she noticed a horse tethered outside a magnificent palomino with a white blaze down its face. Beside it stood Quincy, dressed in a clean white shirt under his leather vest, his hat in his hands. "Miss Goodwin," he greeted her as the last child scampered away. "Might I have a word?" Tabitha glanced around, acutely aware that they were now alone. "What can I do for you, Mr. Norwood?" "There's to be a social at the Jenkins Ranch this Saturday," he said, his usual confidence seeming slightly diminished. "Dancing, food, the whole town will be there." "Yes, I've heard mention of it," she replied carefully. "I wondered if you might allow me to escort you." The invitation caught her completely off guard. "Mr. Norwood, I don't attend such gatherings." His brow furrowed slightly. "Not even one. It would do you good to meet more of the townspeople. You've been keeping to yourself too much." "By choice," she said firmly. He studied her, those keen eyes seeming to see more than she wanted to reveal. "Is there someone else, Miss Goodwin? Someone waiting for you somewhere?" "No." The word came out sharper than she intended. "There's no one. But that doesn't mean one evening," he interrupted gently. Just a few hours of music and conversation. If you find it unbearable, I'll bring you home straight away." Tabitha looked at him, trying to understand his persistence. She'd given him no encouragement, had been borderline rude at times. Yet here he stood, hat in hand, asking for nothing more than her company for an evening. "Why me, Mr. Norwood?" she asked finally. "There are plenty of eligible young women in Oro Grande who would be delighted by your attention." A smile touched his lips. "Perhaps I'm drawn to mysteries, Miss Goodwin, and you are certainly that." Before she could respond, he added, "I'll call for you at 6 on Saturday. If you decide not to come, I'll understand. No hard feelings." With that, he replaced his hat, nodded respectfully, and left her standing in the schoolhouse doorway. Tabitha spent the next 3 days in a state of indecision. Every instinct told her to decline, to maintain the careful distance she'd established from everyone in town. Yet something about Quincy Norwood's straightforward manner and quiet persistence intrigued her. By Saturday morning, she still hadn't made up her mind. At 5 o'clock, she found herself standing before the small mirror in her rented room above the milliner's shop, studying her reflection. The blue dress she wore was one of only 2 good dresses she possessed, saved for church and special occasions. She'd washed and dried her auburn hair, which now fell in soft waves past her shoulders instead of being restrained in its usual tight bun. "This is foolishness," she told her reflection. Pure foolishness. At precisely 6 o'clock, a knock sounded on the street door below. Tabitha took a deep breath, picked up her shawl, and descended the narrow staircase. When she opened the door, Quincy stood there in a dark suit, white shirt and string tie, his hat in his hands, looking more like a banker than a rancher. His eyes widened slightly at the sight of her. "Miss Goodwin," he said softly, "you look beautiful." "Thank you," she replied, feeling unaccountably shy. "I hope I haven't kept you waiting." "Not at all," he offered his arm. "My buggy's just there." The Jenkins Ranch lay 5 miles outside town, and during the journey, Quincy proved to be an easy conversationalist, asking about her teaching and sharing stories about his ranch without pressing her for personal information she wasn't ready to give. The ranch house was ablaze with light, lanterns hanging from the porch and trees surrounding it. The sound of fiddle music drifted through the open windows, along with laughter and conversation. As Quincy helped her down from the buggy, Tabitha felt a momentary panic. "Perhaps this wasn't, it'll be fine," he assured her, his hand warm on hers. "We don't have to stay long." Inside, the main room had been cleared for dancing, with chairs lining the walls and tables of food and drink in the adjoining dining room. Heads turned as they entered, curious glances and whispers following them as Quincy led her through the crowd. "Mr. Norwood, Miss Goodwin." Mrs. Jenkins approached, her round face flushed with pleasure and exertion. "How wonderful you could both come, and together no less." "Margaret," Quincy greeted her with a warm smile, "thank you for having us. Everything looks splendid." "Oh, it's nothing fancy, but folks need a reason to gather now and then." She turned to Tabitha. "Miss Goodwin, we're so pleased you've joined us. You've been something of a mystery since arriving in our little town." "I've been focused on my teaching," Tabitha replied politely. "Of course, dear. Well, there's food aplenty, and Thomas has opened his best whiskey for the gentlemen. The dancing's just getting lively. You young people should join in." As Mrs. Jenkins moved away to greet other guests, Quincy leaned closer to Tabitha. "Would you care for some punch before we brave the dance floor?" "I'm not much of a dancer," she admitted. "Neither am I, but I reckon we can manage not to step on too many toes." His easy smile was infectious, and Tabitha found herself smiling back. The evening progressed more pleasantly than she had anticipated. After a glass of punch and some gentle coaxing, she allowed Quincy to lead her onto the dance floor for a waltz. His hand at her waist was respectful, his movements surprisingly graceful for such a tall man. "You dance very well for someone who claims not to be much of a dancer," she observed. "My mother's influence," he replied. "She insisted her sons learn proper manners, including dancing, said no lady would have us otherwise. Your mother sounds like a wise woman. She was." A shadow passed over his face. "She passed 10 years ago." "I'm sorry," Tabitha said softly. "My own mother died when I was 16. It was the first personal information she'd volunteered, and Quincy seemed to recognize the significance. He nodded, his eyes holding hers. "It leaves a hole that never quite fills, doesn't it?" "Yes," she agreed, surprised by his understanding. As the evening wore on, Tabitha found herself relaxing, even enjoying conversations with townspeople she'd previously kept at arm's length. She learned that Quincy was respected throughout the county, not just for his successful ranch, but for his fairness in business and generosity during hard times. He brought supplies to the Whittakers all last winter when Thomas broke his leg and couldn't work, Mrs. Miller, the Reverend's wife, told her as they watched Quincy talking with a group of men across the room. "Never asked for payment, though everyone knows the Whittakers aren't ones to take charity easily. He just said it was a loan to be repaid when they were back on their feet." "That's very kind," Tabitha murmured, her eyes on his tall figure. "Kind, yes, but lonely too, I think," Mrs. Miller continued. "That ranch of his needs a woman's touch. We've all wondered why he's never married." The conversation was veering into territory that made Tabitha uncomfortable. "Excuse me, Mrs. Miller. I should check on Mr. Norwood. We'll need to start back soon." It was nearly midnight when they finally left, the party still in full swing behind them. The night air was cool, and Quincy draped a blanket over Tabitha's lap as they set off in the buggy. "Did you enjoy yourself?" he asked, his voice quiet in the darkness. "More than I expected to," she admitted. "Thank you for persuading me to come. Thank you for giving me a chance." He glanced at her. "You've been hiding, Miss Goodwin. I won't ask why, but I hope you know that Oro Grande is a good town with good people. Whatever you're running from, you might find sanctuary here." Tabitha stiffened. "What makes you think I'm running from something?" "Experience," he said simply. "I recognize the signs." They rode in silence for a time, the only sounds the rhythmic clip-clop of the horses' hooves and the occasional night bird's call. "I was engaged," Tabitha said suddenly, the words emerging as if of their own accord. "Back in St. Louis, to a man named Edward Blackburn. He was wealthy, respected. My father's choice, not mine, though I had no objections at first." Quincy remained silent, giving her space to continue. "I discovered he was involved in something terrible, a scheme to defraud investors, many of them poor immigrants who'd entrusted their life savings to his bank." She swallowed hard. "When I confronted him, he showed a side of himself I hadn't seen before, violent, threatening." "Did he hurt you?" Quincy's voice was tight with barely controlled anger. "He tried." Tabitha's hands twisted in her lap. "I managed to get away, but I knew I couldn't stay in St. Louis. Edward has connections, political influence, friends in law enforcement. He made it clear that if I spoke out against him, I'd regret it. So I left, changed my name slightly, kept moving west until I reached Oro Grande. And now?" Quincy asked gently. "Do you think he's still looking for you?" "I don't know," she admitted. "Sometimes I think I'm being foolish, that he's forgotten me entirely. Other times." She shuddered. "I can't take the risk. My father died last year and I have no other family. There's no one to miss me if I simply disappear." "I would miss you," Quincy said quietly. "And so would those 23 children who light up when you enter the schoolhouse each morning." Tabitha looked at him, touched by the sincerity in his voice. "I've been alone for so long, Mr. Norwood. It's safer that way." Safer, perhaps, but a hard way to live. He guided the horse around a bend in the road. "My father used to say that a life without connection isn't really living at all. Your father sounds as wise as your mother." He had his moments. A smile touched Quincy's lips. Though he also believed snakes could predict the weather and that wearing a copper bracelet would cure rheumatism, so his wisdom had its limits. Tabitha laughed, a genuine sound that surprised even her. Quincy's smile broadened at the sound. "That's nice," he said. "Your laugh. I don't reckon I've heard it before. I haven't had much cause for laughter lately." "Well, that's something we'll have to remedy, Miss Goodwin." When they reached the milliner's shop, Quincy helped her down from the buggy, his hand steady at her waist. He walked her to the door, waiting as she located her key. "Thank you for a lovely evening," she said, suddenly awkward. "The pleasure was mine." He hesitated. "I'd like to see you again, Tabitha, not just at church or passing in town." It was the first time he had used her given name, and the sound of it in his deep voice sent an unexpected warmth through her. "I'd like that too," she found herself saying. His smile was like the sunrise. "Good. I'll call on you next Saturday if that's agreeable." "It is." He took her hand then, raising it to his lips for a brief, respectful kiss that nevertheless left her skin tingling. "Good night, Tabitha." "Good night, Quincy." She watched from her window as he drove away, her heart lighter than it had been in months. The following weeks brought a gradual but noticeable change in Tabitha's life in Oro Grande. She still maintained her professional demeanor at the schoolhouse, but she no longer hurried back to her rented room immediately after dismissing the children. Instead, she accepted invitations to tea with the mothers of her students, attended church socials, and even joined the ladies' reading circle that met weekly at Mrs. Miller's home. And every Saturday, without fail, Quincy called for her. Sometimes they attended local gatherings, but more often they simply rode together, exploring the hills and valleys surrounding Oro Grande. Quincy proved to be knowledgeable about the land, pointing out medicinal plants, identifying animal tracks, and sharing stories of the area's history. On a particularly beautiful Saturday in late April, he took her to a hidden valley where wildflowers carpeted the ground in a riot of color: blue lupines, golden poppies, and delicate white daisies swaying in the gentle breeze. "This is breathtaking," Tabitha said as they spread a blanket beneath a cottonwood tree for their picnic lunch. "I found it my first year here," Quincy replied, unloading food from his saddlebags. "It's at its most beautiful in spring, but it has its charms in every season." They ate the simple meal of fried chicken, biscuits, and apple pie that Mrs. Thompson, Quincy's housekeeper, had packed for them. Afterward, they sat side by side against the tree trunk, watching clouds drift across the New Mexico sky. "Tell me about your ranch," Tabitha said, genuinely curious. "You've mentioned it, but I've never seen it." "It's nothing fancy," Quincy replied. "Just a place I've been putting my heart into for the past 5 years. Main house, bunkhouse for the hands, barn and corrals. About 2,000 acres, mostly grazing land for cattle, though I keep some horses too." 2,000 acres. Tabitha was impressed. "That's substantial." "It is now. Started with 500. Added to it when I could." He smiled at a memory. "The day I bought that first parcel was the first time I felt like I might put down roots somewhere. You moved around before that." "Quite a bit." He picked up a blade of grass, twirling it between his fingers. "After the war I fought for the Union. I wasn't sure what to do with myself. Tried my hand at different things. Was a lawman for a while in Kansas, then drifted west. Worked cattle drives, did some prospecting without much luck." "What made you decide on ranching?" "Freedom, I suppose. I like the open spaces, the rhythm of the seasons. The independence of it. He glanced at her. What about you? Did you always want to be a teacher? Yes, though my father had other ideas. He wanted me to make a good marriage, settle into society life. She sighed. After my mother died, he became fixated on securing my future through marriage. When Edward showed interest, well, father was overjoyed. And you weren't. I was. Flattered. Edward was handsome, educated, seemingly kind. Many women would have been thrilled by his proposal. She pulled a wildflower, twirling it as he had done with the grass. But there was always something missing. A connection I thought would develop with time. And then you discovered his true character, Quincy said quietly. Yes. She looked away. I sometimes wonder if I should have seen it sooner. There were signs, moments of coldness, of calculation, the way he spoke about those beneath his station, but I ignored them. We often see what we want to see, Quincy observed. It's human nature. Perhaps. Tabitha met his eyes. What do you see when you look at me, Quincy? The question hung between them, more revealing than she had intended. Quincy considered her for a long moment before answering. I see a woman of remarkable courage and intelligence, someone who values truth and justice enough to risk everything for them, who cares deeply about her students, though she tries to maintain a professional distance. His voice softened. I see someone who's been hurt but isn't broken. Someone who deserves happiness but isn't convinced she has the right to claim it. Tabitha felt tears prick at her eyes, moved by the perception and tenderness in his words. And what if Edward finds me? What if he brings trouble to your door? Then we'll face it together. Quincy reached out, taking her hand in his. You don't have to be alone anymore, Tabitha. She looked down at their joined hands, as large and calloused from work, hers smaller but strong in its own way. I've been alone so long, I'm not sure I remember how to be anything else. I'm a patient man, he said simply. I can wait until you're ready. The moment stretched between them, filled with unspoken possibility. Then, with a gentleness that brought fresh tears to her eyes, Quincy raised her hand to his lips and pressed a kiss to her palm. We should head back, he said, releasing her hand. Storm clouds gathering to the west. The ride back to town was quiet, each lost in their own thoughts. When they reached the milliner's shop, Quincy helped her down from her horse, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than necessary. Same time next Saturday, he asked. I'd like that, she replied. Then, gathering her courage, she added, perhaps you could show me your ranch sometime. His smile was like sunshine breaking through clouds. I'd be honored. The following week brought unexpected news to Oro Grande. The stagecoach arrived carrying not only mail and packages, but also a distinguished-looking gentleman in an expensive suit who took a room at the hotel and began asking questions about new arrivals to the town. Tabitha was in the schoolhouse, dismissing her students for the day when young Billy Cooper burst through the door, breathless with excitement. Miss Goodwin, there's a fancy man from back east asking all about you at the hotel. Tabitha's blood ran cold. What? What do you mean, Billy? My pa works at the livery, and he heard the man asking Mr. Peterson when you came to town and where you lived. Billy's eyes were wide. Pa said the man's offering money for information. Is he a friend of yours, Miss Goodwin? No, she managed to say through numb lips. No, he's not. After sending Billy home, Tabitha sank into her chair, her mind racing. After nearly 8 months, had Edward finally tracked her down? How had he found her? What would she do now? Her first instinct was to run to pack her meager belongings and slip away in the night, heading further west or perhaps south into Mexico. But the thought of leaving Oro Grande, of leaving her students, of leaving Quincy sent a piercing pain through her chest. She was still sitting at her desk, paralyzed with indecision, when the schoolhouse door opened and Quincy strode in, his expression grim. You've heard, he said, not bothering with pleasantries. She nodded. Billy Cooper told me. His description matches what you told me about Edward Blackburn. Tabitha closed her eyes briefly. What is he saying? Why he's here? Claims he's looking for his fiancée who disappeared under concerning circumstances. Says he fears for her mental state. Quincy's jaw tightened. He's spinning quite a tale about your supposed instability, how you've done this before. Of course, she said bitterly. He can't admit the truth that I fled because I discovered his criminal activities. No one who knows you would believe his nonsense, Quincy assured her. But they don't know me, not really. I've kept to myself, been standoffish. She looked up at him, fear evident in her eyes. What will I do if he finds me? He won't touch you. Quincy's voice was steel. I promise you that. You don't understand. He has influence connections, so do I. Quincy pulled a chair close to her desk, sitting so they were eye to eye. Tabitha, listen to me. Before I came to New Mexico, I wasn't just any lawman. I worked for the Pinkerton Agency. I still have contacts there, friends who would help if needed. This revelation stunned her. You never said. It didn't seem relevant until now. He reached for her hands, which were trembling on the desk. But it means I know how to handle men like Blackburn. We need evidence of his crimes, something concrete that would make him more interested in leaving you alone than pursuing you. I have nothing, she said helplessly. It was all just conversations I overheard, documents I glimpsed in his study. That's a start, Quincy insisted. Names, dates, anything you can remember could help build a case. He squeezed her hands. But first, we need to get you somewhere safe. He's asking all over town for a Miss Tabitha Goodwin. It won't take him long to find you. Where would I go? My ranch, he said without hesitation. It's isolated, defensible. I have men I trust there. The idea both terrified and comforted her. Quincy, I can't ask you to risk yourself. You didn't ask. I'm offering. His blue eyes held her steadily. We'll leave tonight after dark. Pack only what you need. The school Mrs. Miller can substitute for a few days. She taught before the Reverend married her. He stood decisive. I'll make the arrangements. Be ready at midnight. Don't use the front stairs. There's a back entrance through the milliner's storeroom. I'll meet you there. Before she could protest further, he leaned down and pressed a swift, firm kiss to her lips. It was over almost before she registered the warmth of his mouth on hers, but it left her breathless nonetheless. Trust me, Tabitha, he said softly. Please. After he left, Tabitha moved through the remainder of the day in a daze, mechanically packing her few valuables and necessary clothing into a small carpet-bag. When darkness fell, she sat by her window, watching the street below. Occasionally, she glimpsed a figure moving past the milliner's shop, sometimes a townsperson on legitimate business, sometimes a stranger whose purposeful stride and elegant clothing marked him as out of place in Oro Grande. Edward. Even from a distance, she recognized the set of his shoulders, the way he held his head. Each sighting sent her heart racing with fear. At precisely midnight, she made her way silently down the back stairs, through the storeroom filled with bolts of fabric and half-finished hats, to the small door that opened into the alley behind the shop. As promised, Quincy was waiting with 2 horses. Any trouble? He whispered, taking her bag. She shook her head, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. He helped her mount, then swung up onto his own horse, a powerful black gelding. Stay close, he instructed. We'll take the back ways out of town. They rode in silence, keeping to the shadows, avoiding the main streets. Tabitha's heart pounded so loudly she was certain it would give them away. But they reached the edge of town without incident, and once on the open road, Quincy urged their horses to a faster pace. The Broken Spur Ranch lay 10 miles north of Oro Grande, nestled in a sheltered valley with hills rising on 3 sides and a creek providing water year-round. They approached it after an hour's ride, the main house dark except for a single lamp burning in a downstairs window. "My foreman, Wilson, is expecting us," Quincy explained as they dismounted. "He's the only one I've told the full story to. The other hands know only that we have a visitor who needs privacy." The front door opened before they reached it, revealing a stocky, gray-haired man with a weathered face and kind eyes. "Mr. Norwood," he nodded. "Miss Goodwin, everything's ready as you asked." "Thank you, Wilson," Quincy said, helping Tabitha up the steps. "Any visitors or unusual activity?" "All quiet, sir. I've put Rodriguez and Martinez on watch shifts through the night, just to be safe." Inside, the ranch house was simple but comfortable, with sturdy furniture, clean lines, and touches that spoke of a man who valued quality over ornamentation. Wilson showed Tabitha to a bedroom on the second floor, a pleasant space with a 4-poster bed, dresser, and washstand. Fresh flowers stood in a pottery vase on the windowsill. "The missus arranged the room," Wilson explained, seeing her notice the flowers. "She said a lady would appreciate such touches." "It's lovely," Tabitha assured him. "Please thank Mrs. Wilson for me." "Get some rest," Quincy said from the doorway. "We'll talk more in the morning." Despite her exhaustion, Tabitha slept fitfully, waking at every creak and night sound in the unfamiliar house. When dawn finally broke, she rose, washed and dressed in the simple blue skirt and white shirtwaist she'd packed. Her hair, usually pinned severely back for teaching, she left in a simple braid down her back. Downstairs, she found Quincy in the kitchen, cooking bacon and eggs at the large cast iron stove. The domestic sight of him, shirt sleeves rolled up, concentration on his face as he turned the bacon, was unexpectedly touching. "Good morning," she said softly. He turned, a smile breaking across his face. "Tabitha, did you sleep?" "Some," she admitted. "Your home is beautiful." "Sit," he invited, gesturing to the table where coffee was already poured. "Breakfast is nearly ready." They ate in companionable silence, the events of the previous day creating a strange intimacy between them. When they'd finished, Quincy refilled their coffee cups and leaned back in his chair. "I sent a man to Albuquerque last night with telegrams to my contacts at Pinkerton," he said. "With luck, we'll have information on Blackburn's activities within a few days. And in the meantime, you're safe here." He reached across the table, covering her hand with his. "No one will find you unless I allow it." The confidence in his voice was reassuring, but Tabitha couldn't shake her fear entirely. What if he comes looking? What if he brings the law with him? Sheriff Parker knows me well enough to ask questions before taking action. And if Blackburn brings law from elsewhere? Quincy's expression hardened. "Well, let's just say the territorial law out here tends to respect property rights. This is my land. I decide who's welcome." After breakfast, Quincy showed her around the ranch, the barns where new calves nestled against their mothers, the corrals where cowboys broke wild mustangs, the kitchen garden where Mrs. Wilson grew vegetables and herbs. Despite the circumstances, Tabitha found herself relaxing, drawn into the rhythm and purpose of ranch life. That evening, after a dinner prepared by Mrs. Wilson, they sat on the front porch watching the sunset paint the western sky in shades of orange and purple. Tabitha wrapped a shawl around her shoulders against the cooling air. "You seem at home here," Quincy observed. "It's peaceful," she replied. "Different from town, certainly from the city." "Could you see yourself living in a place like this?" he asked, his voice carefully casual. Tabitha looked at him, understanding the deeper question. "Once I couldn't have imagined it. Now, yes, I believe I could." The days passed with a strange mixture of tension and tranquility. Each morning, Tabitha expected to hear that Edward had discovered her whereabouts. Each evening that passed without incident allowed her to breathe a little easier, to settle more comfortably into the rhythm of life at the Broken Spur. She found ways to make herself useful, helping Mrs. Wilson with cooking and mending, assisting Quincy with his account books, even teaching reading to two of the younger ranch hands who had never had formal schooling. In the evenings, she and Quincy would sit in his study, where she worked to recall every detail she could about Edward's fraudulent schemes, names of investors, amounts discussed, dates of transactions she'd overheard. "You have an excellent memory," Quincy said on the fourth night, reviewing the pages of notes they'd compiled. "Teaching requires it," she replied with a small smile. 23 children, all at different levels of learning. You must remember where each one stands." He nodded, setting down his pen. "Tabitha, there's something I've been meaning to ask you." His serious tone made her look up sharply. "What is it? If we succeed, if we gather enough evidence against Blackburn to neutralize his threat, what will you do then?" The question caught her off guard. I haven't thought that far ahead. Continue teaching in Oro Grande, I suppose." "Is that what you want?" His eyes held hers. "To return to your life exactly as it was?" "I don't understand what you're asking." Quincy leaned forward, his expression intense. "I'm asking if there might be room in your future for changes, for new possibilities." Her heart quickened as his meaning became clear. "Quincy," a sharp knock at the front door interrupted them. Quincy was on his feet instantly, moving to the gun cabinet and retrieving his Colt revolver. "Stay here," he instructed, his voice low and firm. Tabitha nodded, fear clutching at her throat as Quincy disappeared into the hallway. She heard murmured voices, then footsteps returning. When Quincy reappeared, his expression was grim. "It's Wilson. A rider just came from town. Blackburn's been asking questions about me, about my connection to you. He's discovered you're no longer at the milliner's." "Will he come here?" Tabitha whispered. "Eventually." Quincy holstered his gun, "But we may have bought some time. The story in town is that you've gone to visit a sick relative in Santa Fe. Will anyone believe that? It doesn't matter if they do. It only matters if it creates doubt, slows him down." He paced the room, thinking. "We need to move forward with our plan. The telegrams I received today suggest there's an investigation already underway into Blackburn's bank. The information you've provided could be crucial. What do we do?" "I'm sending everything to my contact in Denver tomorrow. We'll need to lie low for a few more days, give them time to act on it." He stopped pacing, looking at her directly. "Are you still sure about this, Tabitha? Once we set these wheels in motion, there's no turning back." She straightened her shoulders. "I'm sure. Edward deserves to face consequences for what he's done." Quincy nodded, pride evident in his eyes. "Then we proceed as planned." The next morning brought unexpected developments. Tabitha woke to the sound of horses in the yard and men's voices raised in greeting. When she came downstairs, she found Quincy in conversation with a lean, gray-suited man whose bearing screamed law enforcement despite his civilian clothes. "Tabitha," Quincy said when he saw her, "this is Marshal Davies. He's with the Treasury Department." Davies tipped his hat. "Miss Goodwin, I understand you have information about Edward Blackburn's financial activities." "The Treasury Department," she echoed, confused. "How my telegram reached more receptive ears than I expected," Quincy explained. "The government has been building a case against Blackburn for months. Your information could be the missing piece." For the next 2 hours, Tabitha sat with Davies, going through every detail she could remember about Edward's scheme. The marshal took copious notes, occasionally asking clarifying questions or showing her documents to confirm names and dates. "This is extremely helpful, Miss Goodwin," he said when they finished. "Combined with the evidence we've already gathered, it should be enough for an arrest warrant." "He's here in New Mexico," she reminded him. "In Oro Grande." "Not for long," Davies replied grimly. "I have men positioned in town. Once I send the telegram confirming your statement, they'll take him into custody." Just like that. She couldn't quite believe it could be so simple after months of fear. "The wheels of justice turn slowly until they don't," Davies said with a tight smile. "We've been building this case for over a year. Your testimony is the final piece we needed." After Davies left to send his telegram, Tabitha sat on the porch, trying to process the sudden turn of events. Quincy joined her, sitting close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. "It's almost over," he said softly. "I can hardly believe it." She turned to look at him. "How did you know to contact the Treasury Department?" "I didn't," he admitted. "My telegram went to my old supervisor at Pinkerton. He has connections throughout federal law enforcement. When he learned Blackburn was involved, he reached out to Davies." "You've done so much for me," Tabitha said, her voice thick with emotion. "I don't know how I can ever repay you." Quincy's hand found hers, his fingers interlacing with her own. "I don't want repayment, Tabitha. I want—" He hesitated. "I want a future with you," her breath caught. "Quincy, let me finish," he said gently. "I know it's soon. I know you've been through an ordeal that would make anyone cautious. But these past weeks having you here, seeing you each morning, talking with you each night, they've shown me what my life could be like with you in it." His blue eyes were earnest, vulnerable. "I'm falling in love with you, Tabitha Goodwin. I think perhaps I started falling that first day in church when you looked at me with those wary eyes." Tears welled in Tabitha's eyes. "I'm afraid," she whispered. "Not of you, never of you, but of trusting my judgment again, of believing I deserve happiness." "You deserve everything good in this world," he said fiercely. "And I want to spend my life making sure you have it." Before she could respond, the sound of approaching horses drew their attention. Wilson appeared from the barn, rifle in hand, as 3 riders came into view. Tabitha recognized Marshal Davies in the lead, followed by 2 deputies. Quincy stood, helping Tabitha to her feet, his hand remaining supportively at the small of her back as the men dismounted. "It's done," Davies announced without preamble. "Blackburn is in custody, being transported to Santa Fe as we speak. He'll be extradited to Missouri to face federal charges." Tabitha's knees weakened with relief, and Quincy's arm came around her waist, steadying her. "He didn't come quietly," one of the deputies added, sporting a bruised jaw. "Claimed there was some mistake, that he was a respectable banker searching for his disturbed fiancée." "That story fell apart when we produced the evidence," Davies said with satisfaction. "The man's paperwork alone is enough to hang him, figuratively speaking." When faced with the documentation, he started bargaining, offering names of associates. "Will I need to testify?" Tabitha asked, dreading the prospect of facing Edward in court. "Possibly, but not immediately." "We'll need your written statement, certainly, which you can provide here if Mr. Norwood is agreeable." "Of course," Quincy confirmed. "What happens now?" Tabitha asked. "Now, Miss Goodwin, you're free," Davies said simply. "Free to live your life without looking over your shoulder. Blackburn will be occupied with his own legal troubles for years to come. And with the evidence mounting against him, he'll have no credibility to pursue any claims against you." After the marshal and his men departed, promising to return the next day for her formal statement, Tabitha stood in the yard, watching the dust settle behind their horses. The reality of her newfound freedom was almost too enormous to comprehend. "Are you all right?" Quincy asked, his concern evident. "I'm not sure," she admitted. "For so long fear has been my constant companion. I'm not certain I remember how to live without it. You'll learn, he assured her, guiding her back to the porch, day by day. They sat in the porch swing, Quincy's arm around her shoulders, the gentle movement soothing as they watched the sunset. The ranch hands went about their evening chores, the familiar sounds of cattle lowing and men calling to one another, creating a peaceful backdrop. Before we were interrupted, Tabitha said finally, "You were saying something." Quincy looked down at her, a smile playing at his lips. Was I? About the future, about us. His arm tightened around her. I meant every word, Tabitha. I'm falling in love with you, or perhaps I should say I have fallen, completely and irrevocably. She turned to face him fully. In St. Louis, I thought I knew what love was supposed to be, something practical, comfortable, compatible interests and social positions. Her hand reached up to touch his face, the stubble rough against her palm. But with you, it's different. It's overwhelming, frightening even in its intensity. Are you saying, I'm saying I love you too, Quincy Norwood, she whispered. I think I began loving you that day at the schoolhouse when you brought wooden puzzles for children who weren't even yours to worry about. The joy that transformed his face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he lowered his mouth to hers. The kiss was gentle at first, a question asked and answered, then deepening as Tabitha's arms wound around his neck, drawing him closer. When they finally parted, both breathless, Quincy rested his forehead against hers. Marry me, Tabitha. Not tomorrow or next week, whenever you're ready. But say you'll be my wife. Yes, she said without hesitation, surprising herself with her certainty. Yes, I'll marry you. The formal statement to Marshal Davies took less time than Tabitha had feared, her recollections clear and detailed enough to satisfy the Treasury Department's requirements. When the paperwork was complete, Davies shook her hand firmly. You've done a great service, Miss Goodwin. The immigrants Blackburn defrauded may never recover all their money, but at least he won't be able to harm others. That's all I wanted, she replied honestly, for him to be stopped. After the marshal's departure, Quincy suggested they ride into town the next day to inform Reverend Miller of their engagement and discuss wedding plans. Despite her newfound freedom, Tabitha felt a flutter of anxiety at the thought of returning to Oro Grande so soon. Everyone will have questions, she said as they walked around the perimeter of the house, enjoying the evening air. Let them ask, Quincy replied. We'll tell them as much or as little as you wish. The important thing is that Blackburn is gone and we can move forward with our lives. He squeezed her hand. Together. His confidence was contagious, and by the time they rode into town the following morning, Tabitha felt prepared to face whatever curiosity awaited them. They stopped first at the schoolhouse, where Mrs. Miller had been filling in during Tabitha's absence. Miss Goodwin, the older woman exclaimed, clearly relieved to see her. We've been so worried. The children have missed you terribly. I'm sorry for leaving so suddenly, Tabitha replied. There were circumstances I needed to address, Mrs. Miller's eyes darted between her and Quincy, noting their clasped hands. I see, she said, a knowing smile spreading across her face. Well, circumstances do arise, don't they? Mrs. Miller, we'd like to speak with the Reverend if he's available, Quincy said formally. We have an announcement to make and we'll need his services. The woman's face lit up with delight. Of course, he's at the parsonage. I'll take you there directly. Word of their engagement spread through Oro Grande with astonishing speed. By afternoon, well-wishers were stopping them in the street to offer congratulations. The children, hearing that their teacher would be returning the following week, but would soon become Mrs. Norwood, peppered her with questions about the wedding and whether she would still be their teacher afterward. Of course I will, she assured them, touched by their concern. Being Mrs. Norwood won't change that. Will you live at the big ranch? Little Annie Wilson asked, wide-eyed. Yes, Tabitha confirmed. But Mr. Norwood has promised to bring me to school each day and take me home afterward. This arrangement satisfied the children, who soon ran off to play, their worries about losing their teacher allayed. As they walked back toward the milliner's shop, where Tabitha needed to collect the remainder of her belongings, they passed the hotel. Quincy felt her tense beside him and followed her gaze to a well-dressed man emerging from the building. "It's not him," he assured her quietly. "Blackburn is in custody in Santa Fe." "I know," she said, but her voice was shaky. "It will take time not to see threats everywhere." "Take all the time you need," he said, wrapping an arm around her waist. "I'll be right beside you." They set the wedding date for 3 weeks, hence long enough for preparations, but soon enough to satisfy their desire to begin their life together. Mrs. Miller and the other church ladies immediately took charge of arrangements, promising a celebration worthy of Oro Grande's most eligible bachelor and their beloved schoolteacher. "I feel I should contribute more," Tabitha fretted as they rode back to the ranch that evening. "You're giving me yourself," Quincy replied simply. "That's contribution enough." The wedding day dawned clear and beautiful, the late May sky an unblemished blue. Tabitha dressed in the guest bedroom of the Miller's home, where she'd spent the night in accordance with tradition. Her wedding gown, ordered from Santa Fe, was simpler than fashion dictated, but suited her perfectly ivory satin with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs, the skirt falling in clean lines to the floor. Mrs. Miller arranged her hair, threading orange blossoms through the auburn waves before securing the short veil. "You look beautiful, my dear," she said, blinking back tears. "Mr. Norwood is a fortunate man indeed." "I'm the fortunate one," Tabitha replied softly. When it was time, Reverend Miller escorted her to the church, serving as the father figure she lacked. The building was filled to capacity, the entire town turning out to witness the union of two people who had, in different ways, become important to their community. Tabitha paused at the church entrance, taking a deep breath before the doors opened. The familiar interior was transformed by flowers and ribbons, the afternoon sunlight streaming through the simple windows to illuminate the crowded pews. And there, standing at the altar, was Quincy, tall and handsome in his black suit, his eyes finding hers immediately. The walk down the aisle passed in a blur, her focus entirely on the man waiting for her. When Reverend Miller placed her hand in Quincy's, the warmth and strength of his grip anchored her in the moment. "Dearly beloved," the Reverend began, his voice carrying through the church, "we are gathered here today in the sight of God and this congregation to join this man and this woman in holy matrimony." The ceremony was traditional, the vows time-honored, but as Tabitha spoke the words, she infused them with all the love and commitment she felt. When Quincy slipped the gold band onto her finger, a simple ring that had been his mother's, she felt the last of her fears melt away, replaced by a certainty that this was exactly where she belonged. "By the authority vested in me," Reverend Miller proclaimed, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. What God has joined together, let no man put asunder." He smiled warmly. "You may kiss your bride." Quincy's kiss was gentle but thorough, drawing good-natured cheers from the congregation, when they turned to face the church as Mr. and Mrs. Quincy Norwood. Tabitha's heart was so full she thought it might burst. The celebration that followed at the Jenkins Ranch was joyous and lively, with music, dancing, and enough food to feed half the territory. Tabitha found herself surrounded by well-wishers, many of whom she now counted as friends rather than mere acquaintances. "You've transformed him," Wilson commented as he and his wife offered their congratulations. "Never seen the boss so happy." "He's transformed me as well," Tabitha replied, watching as Quincy swung young Tommy Wilson around in an impromptu dance, the boys' laughter ringing out. "Given me a home when I thought I'd never have one again." As the sun began to set, Quincy found her amidst the crowd, his eyes warm with love and something else that made her blush. "Ready to go home, Mrs. Norwood?" "Yes," she said, the word carrying all the promise of their future together. "I'm ready." Their departure was met with cheers and thrown flower petals, the guests lining the pathway to the decorated buggy that would carry them back to the broken spur. As they drove away, Tabitha leaned against her husband's shoulder, content in a way she had never imagined possible. The broken spur looked different as they approached it in the moonlight, not just a ranch house now, but their home. Quincy helped her down from the buggy, but before she could walk toward the door, he swept her into his arms. "Tradition," he explained with a grin, carrying her across the threshold. Inside, the house was warm and welcoming, with fresh flowers in vases and a fire laid in the bedroom hearth. Mrs. Wilson had prepared the master bedroom before departing for her own cabin, leaving the newlyweds in perfect privacy. Later, as they lay together in the large four-poster bed, Tabitha traced the line of Quincy's jaw with her fingertips. "I never thought I'd find this," she confessed. "Love, security, happiness, all of it seemed like something meant for other people. And now?" he asked, catching her hand and pressing a kiss to her palm. "Now I understand that happiness isn't something that happens to you," she replied thoughtfully. "It's something you build together day by day, and I want to build it with you, Quincy, for the rest of our lives." His answer was in his kiss, and in the tender way he showed her throughout the night exactly how much he loved her. The years that followed brought changes to the broken spur and to Oro Grande. Tabitha continued teaching, riding to and from town each day with Quincy or one of the ranch hands when his business took him elsewhere. The ranch prospered under their joint management, Quincy handling the cattle and land, Tabitha keeping the books with the precision and attention to detail that made her an excellent teacher. Their first child, a son they named James after Quincy's father, arrived a year after their wedding. He was followed 2 years later by a daughter, Sarah, named for Tabitha's mother. Both children grew up with the freedom of the ranch and the discipline of parents who valued education and integrity above all else. In the autumn of 1888, a decade after that first meeting in the church, Quincy and Tabitha sat on their front porch, watching their children play in the yard as the sun set over the hills. James, at 9, was already showing his father's height and skill with horses, while 7-year-old Sarah had inherited her mother's auburn hair and quick mind. "You ever think about that Sunday?" Quincy asked, his arm around her shoulders as they rocked gently in the porch swing. "When I sat beside you in church, often," Tabitha admitted with a smile. "How close I came to ignoring you completely." "I wouldn't have let you," he said confidently. "I knew the moment I saw you that you were special, worth pursuing even if you didn't make it easy." She laughed, leaning into his embrace. "And here I thought you were just being neighborly, offering a seat to a newcomer." "Well, that too," he conceded. "But there was something about you, Tabitha, something that called to me even then." They sat in comfortable silence, watching as James showed Sarah how to throw a lasso, the little girl's face screwed up in concentration as she attempted to copy her brother's technique. "Are you happy?" Quincy asked suddenly, his voice serious. "With this life we've built?" Tabitha turned to look at him, seeing the same strong features that had first caught her attention all those years ago, now beloved and familiar. "Completely," she assured him. I have everything I never dared to dream of: a husband I love, children who bring me joy every day, work that fulfills me, a home that's truly mine." She touched his face gently. "You gave me all of that, Quincy. You and your stubborn determination to break through my walls." He caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm, a gesture that had become their private signal of affection over the years. "I'd do it all again in a heartbeat," he said. "Even the hard parts." "So would I," she replied, leaning in to kiss him properly, heedless of their children's giggling as they noticed their parents' display of affection. As twilight deepened into night, they called the children in for supper, the family gathering around the large oak table that had seen countless meals, conversations, and celebrations. Looking around at the faces, she loved her husband's strong, kind features, James's serious expression so like his father's, Sarah's bright eyes and mischievous smile. Tabitha felt a wave of gratitude so powerful it brought tears to her eyes. From the back pew of a church where she'd tried to remain unseen to this moment of complete belonging, her journey had been unexpected, sometimes frightening, but ultimately more rewarding than she could have imagined. And it had all begun with a simple act of kindness. A cowboy taking the empty seat beside a woman who thought she wanted to remain invisible. As if reading her thoughts, Quincy reached across the table, his hand finding hers, their fingers intertwining in the familiar gesture that always reminded Tabitha of one simple truth. She was home, she was loved, and she would never be invisible again.